Do you feel transported after that
I
intro? Well, welcome to another episode of On Writing. This is a series brought to you by Reclaim Hostess, where we're thinking about and talking with various people who've kind of come up with the blog professionally and otherwise. And today we're joined by Provost Chris Long, who is Provost at University of Oregon. Before then, worked as the Dean at Michigan State University for the School of Arts and Humanities. Is that right?
Arts and Letters, yeah, College of Arts and Letters, and also the Honors College there, yeah.
There you go. And then you were a philosophy professor at Penn State University before that. Is that correct?
Right. Yep, that's right.
So I wanted to start this by asking you, we're talking, this series is pretty much about writing, and I'd love to hear about your relationship to writing as an academic coming to the web. Like, when did that start and what did that look like?
Well, thank you, Jim. Thank you for inviting me here. And asking such a great question. I mean, I've always thought of actually, the more I think about it, I think of my life as a writing life. And I think of all of the jobs that I've held, the jobs that you mentioned, as writing jobs. And what I mean by that is, for me, writing is a practice of self-reflection. It is a way for me to find out what I think about an issue, try to put words to my experience, try to find meaning in, my finite human life that I'm navigating along with the rest of us. And the opportunity to write generally, I mean, I have a pretty robust practice of writing. I journal. I every morning get up and spend some time with my fountain pens and my paper, and I do some journaling, reflecting on the day to come, what happened the day before. And often it's just kind of, a lot of it's reminding myself to be present and to try to bring my full self to certainly more recently, as I've become an academic leader, that's been a key part of that part of the practice. But you asked about the beginning, and I have to, with public writing, with blogging in particular, that goes back to my time at Penn State and with Cole Camp-Lees and his team at the Teaching and Learning with Technology unit in, I think we were 2006 or so when we started the blogs at Penn State. And at that time, I was a relatively new philosophy professor at Penn State, and I was really trying to experiment with blogging, not only for myself, but for my teaching, and how I could cultivate a kind of writing that with my students that would empower them to make meaning out of the text that we were reading. And what I found in blogging was the power of writing in public. So, there's a danger to it, but there's also a robustness or it brings a certain kind of intentionality, because it's going to be read by one knows not who, and it's going to be reflective of who you are and what you are. There's an attention to what you're saying, how you're saying it. And I found over time, certainly, that my blog, that at cplong.org, has been a place for me to go to reflect and to say things publicly. Yes. So I'm always super, thoughtful about before I press publish, what's there. And I'm trying to be both authentic and also a little bit of craft to it. I want to have some eloquence if I can find the words for it, but really just try to reflect on what's going on for me. So in that time in 2016, we were experimenting. I mean, I can't tell you how many conversations we had about, within the teaching framework. Well, should each student have their own blog? Should we have one blog for the whole class? How do we do it? And a lot of those questions are still kind of in process from my perspective.
Did the blogging at that time, so in 2006, Penn State blogs, early example of WordPress multi-site used
Yeah.
across, actually, they might have used a different platform before WordPress multi-site, but across the institution. Was there kind of real tension between that and the traditional expectations of an academic, which is monographs or, published in journals? Like, was the blogging at that point considered marginal?
Yeah, I would say was and is. I mean, let's be honest about it. I never saw blogging as a replacement for published articles and book monograph. I mean, I've written 4 books. I've published many, many articles, and a lot of those articles and a lot of those books were seeded in blog posts or worked through blog posts. And another piece of that whole experience with teaching and learning with technology at Penn State and blogs at Penn State was podcasting. I mean, I was a fellow in that program, and we did the Digital Dialogue podcast. That was my project, and the idea behind that podcasting project. I mean, nobody was podcasting. I mean, hardly anybody was doing it. Now I feel it was way too early. I should have waited, and then I would have been, maybe some more people would have listened. But I've got 70 some episodes of the Digital Dialogue podcast, and the idea for that podcast was, could I invite colleagues? I was writing a book on Socrates and Plato and politics, and I was reading articles from that were written by colleagues who were dear to me and are dear to me, and I would read their articles and then invite them on the podcast to talk about their articles that shaped my thinking for my book. We link to them in the book, and I will say, in that process, those are some of the best philosophical, best academic conversations I ever had, because we just did what we're doing right now. You open the portal to the public, and you ask questions, you share some experience, and you talk. And because it's public, there's a certain kind of attention and intentionality that comes with it, and the conversation can be deepened. It's an example of how being public can enrich conversation as opposed to tear us apart, which is kind of what's ended up happening. And the Digital Dialogue podcast was, the tagline was cultivating excellences of dialogue in a digital age. And the idea was to model what robust, authentic conversation could be on the web in public. And I mean, we're failing at this. We're completely failing as a culture. And so, we got to keep trying. And I appreciate this opportunity to talk to you and the way you embody that and model that. But if you look at the way people interact online now, it's just totally impoverished.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, and we're talking about it, and Al Levine is noting in the comments, like that moment in Penn State was a powerful moment, that group and what you all were embodying. And one of the things that comes to mind when we were talking about these early social media and the ability, like podcasting or blogging, was that sense where you were opening up a portal, to your point, on the life of the mind at the university. I'm quoting Gardner Campbell, who used to say that to us, like, these become platforms where we can share and open up this idea of the life of the mind at the university. And for me, it seemed like such a natural fit to take the best of the work happening at a university and interfacing it with the true idea of the public, scholar, and trying to open up some of these ideas. And that got co-opted in different ways, whether it be the MOOC or whether it be, the question of the learning management system. But there was a real sense of hope. And as much as often people discount what happened in those years, I think the ideas were solid, right? Like, it wasn't a complete, like, oh, these people are out to lunch. Like, taking great thinkers, putting them in dialogue with one another, sharing that openly. Like, I don't understand why that still seemed crazy or why that failed so horribly.
Well, I guess my expression of the failure is just I'm frustrated. In our current moment, I'll just admit that I'm just extremely frustrated with the state of things at the moment. But I'm not without hope. And when I think back on those days, we really were trying to model the values that we care about. We were trying to model open access. We were trying to model showing each other not just the products of our work, but the process that led to those things. We were trying to learn. We're trying to open ourselves to each other and be willing to adjust in response to dialogue, whether that's comments on the blog or in a podcast kind of environment. That is so critical to the future, and we cannot lose that. One of the great challenges that we were facing then, and we continue to face, is that, I remember encouraging graduate students at Penn State to blog about their dissertation and blog about, their work, and just create a community, use it to build community around the ideas that they're going to base their career on. And there was a lot of pushback. Some students, some of them were interested, and there was pushback on the faculty side. No, don't let your work out there too soon. Don't erode your, you don't want things that are half-baked out there. And I kept saying, no, it's not about, the published work is the fully crafted, vetted, peer-reviewed. Everybody recognizes that as what it is, and it's important. And that is important. That process is important. But so is the ability to build community in ideas, through expressing ideas that are not fully finished. And everybody knows that's the beauty of what a blog is. A blog is something that we're on the way. We don't have it all fully polished. That's the beauty of it. And it's a space for self-reflection. And, we've been doing it almost for 20 years now, and I can go back to earlier posts and say, okay, that's how I was feeling and thinking at that time. I'm still pretty proud of the thoughtfulness and the craft that I spent so much time putting into it. And it's really rewarding to say, actually, I remember, I've been thinking about that for that long. It's like, that's pretty cool to see. But there is a vulnerability. I mean, the academy is not good with vulnerability, and you have to, but my experience has been, when people read it, when they experience that vulnerability, when they experience that openness, oh my goodness, the connection. I mean, you and I have, our relationship goes back decades now, right? Because
Sure.
of this,
Absolutely.
And you're blogging, and me seeing you in my various RSS versions of RSS feeds that I've had over time, oh, okay, Jim's saying something, and, just getting a sense of what's going on with you. It's amazing.
It is. And I think that notion you talk about, like being in process, on the road, and a blog is a laboratory for ideas. I always thought, and when I started at Mary Washington, it was kind of, the idea was we were going to model, to your point, what we want to see this revolution of sharing and the community we have on this campus move beyond.
Yeah.
Right. And that's still a shift we're fighting for when we talk about online learning, and what does it look like, and how do we package, or how do we imagine it? And it seemed to me like some of the practices that you are describing here are in some ways the seeds for what we can model in terms of a university of the air, if you will, or a virtual world. And I just don't know why, no matter how much we think about this stuff, there's this tremendous, like riptide-like pull back to the packaged, predefined, fluorescent lit learning management exchange system that I really, and I haven't railed against the learning management system in a while, Chris. So thank you for giving me that new passion. But I mean, what was it like for you? So as you're doing this at, Penn State, you now are transitioning to Michigan State. You get a position as a leader and as a dean. How did you bring some of what you learned and got at Penn State to Michigan? And interesting that you've only ever been at public schools that I've seen. So I'd be interested in that too.
Yeah, I mean, that's a commitment. That's a commitment of mine, being the publicness, and just the promise of public education and the transformative power of it. The idea that we need to welcome more people into the life of the mind into a reflective life. And that can be a very practical life as well, but it is a recognition. I mean, I'm dedicated my life to the idea that education is transformational. It's vital to the life of to the civic life of our nation, of our country, and it is vital to the communities that we are trying to nurture online and in real life. I feel like online is real life, but in face-to-face environments. And so the transition to Michigan State was one in which I mean, it's interesting. I think in part I got that job because I had been made connections with people from Michigan State through my blog, through the idea of how are you cultivating an online profile for yourself as an academic that is authentic and real and not about just branding or marketing, but actually was a reflection of who you are. I remember talking about there shouldn't be any academic activity that you do, whether it's giving a talk or writing an article or something, where you don't create a digital artifact on your site related to it. So if you're giving a talk, post about your experience, take some pictures with it, talk about who you connected with, and that was and continues to be a hope that I have for higher education, that we can cultivate digital spaces that express who we are as human beings, as academics, as curious people, as people who are trying to live purposeful lives, and that online presence will also be magnetic, will draw people to it and draw people to you, and your work will be amplified and expanded. And I feel like that the job that I got at MSU as dean there was in part because of the connections I made through that process, and the work that we were doing. We had a Mellon grant with partners from MSU at the time, and that was part of how I got to know the university more. And then I started to think, well, I had been thinking all along, well, what does it mean to do this as an administrator? How can you embody your commitment to self-reflection, to showing your work, to showing the thoughts that go into the job that you're doing, the administrative job that you're doing, which so often seems transactional and managerial, and it's so much, so much more than that. It's about a stewarding and caretaking of an institution. These institutions outlast us. They have such an important role. Yeah, they're flawed. They're flawed. But and part of what I began to realize is one of the flaws is that we say we care about certain kinds of things. In a public research institution, we care about transdisciplinary work. We care about diversity and diversifying our community. And yet, the lived experience of our faculty and students and staff is often, no, that doesn't count as in our discipline, that can't count, or this sort of thing doesn't matter as much as that sort of teaching is subservient to research. And, we just impoverish the whole endeavor when we don't have a rich way of recognizing the wide diversity of things that are research, that are teaching, that are the kind of service mission that we are supposed to embody. And so, trying to show in every way I can what it might look like to actually align what we say we care about with what we're doing, and recognize when we fall short, because that's another piece of it.
And I was really struck by that because, one of the things when you were at Michigan State, you really pushed for is that particularly graduate students and young faculty getting their own space and using that as a way to collect all the new work happening and highlighting across the university, which I personally love this. highlighting the work happening and making connections between the work, between disciplines, and really using these tools we have as a kind of tool to highlight the great work rather than us being what we feel like is in isolation. And I really love that vision. Can you talk a little bit about the practical nature of trying to do that? Was it hard to sell?
Yeah, I mean, some people definitely gravitate to it, and it was wonderful when people we built out with Scott Chuprai and others at MSU to digital humanities there to build out a leadership practice where we give people their blog space, help them understand how they could use social media to amplify their work when social media wasn't the mess that it has become. I mean, we could talk more about that at some point, but and then and to think of this as a curated space, just like you would think of your CV, all the time you're spending on your CV, making sure the font's right, making sure everything's on there. Why aren't we paying attention to that and bringing the richness of images and the design dimensions and the possibility that others will actually engage it and maybe even comment to that, so it can be a space that's fully expressive of who we are as academics and as people. And we were able to bring a lot of people through that process, and we've got there's great examples of blogs that people have created and used. It's if you're doing it just as a kind of marketing, like I gotta do it and I'm it's one more thing I have to do, then I would say just don't do it. I mean, if you can see it as a way to build community around your work and around the things you care about, that's when it has life and that's when it has integrity. And that's the most successful examples of that I've seen are when people just they just try to bring their whole selves to it and put what, recognizing it's public and you have to be mindful of that, but doing it that way. And then I also became increasingly as a dean, what the dean says is, then you had to start communicating in certain expected ways with, all college emails and these things. And they were just so overwrought and every word had to be a thing. I'm very much about intentional word choice. I love it. I love a great turn of phrase, and I've tried to bring that to everything I do, but I was losing the vulnerability, the authenticity, the voice. And so going back to the blog and using the blog in that context was really important to me. And then as I transitioned to the University of Oregon and to the provost role, I mean, I'm working it through. You can see I'm trying to do, and especially now when we have some pretty significant political pressures happening. And, speaking as the provost at a major research university is fraught in many ways. And so finding ways to speak both as provost at a major research university and as the human being, Chris Long, who has long practice blogging. And it's not like I'm making up blogging all of a sudden. This is who I've always been. It's allowing me to show to be more reflective, more vulnerable, maybe more human, and to also to show the thinking that's going behind all this, all the energy. It's just so much that we're trying to hold during this time.
Let's talk a little bit about the long road, Chris, if you will.
The long road.
So, the long road is your blog. You started that when you were at Penn State. Then you brought it and self-hosted. I've been watching you. You brought it and self-hosted it at Michigan State on MSU domains. Mm-hmm. And there was a point as you were making your transition to Oregon where you reached out to Reclaim. Mm-hmm. And you're like, hey, I have this blog that I really value. And Taylor Jaden, who we were the two who were working with you, and it was an aha moment for us at Reclaim that we have people who have been doing this, to your point, for 20 years, who have invested a career's worth of time and energy into this space. And you're like, this is a really important space to me, guys. Don't mess it up. Make the transition clean. Let's bring it over on somewhere else. And I mean, I was really struck by your sense of the long road and what that means in terms of your career, because at this point it is a long road of work that is running quite in parallel to your career as an academic and an administrator. And so, like, how are you going to use that space in the communications kind of means that you've recently blogged about using the blog as an alternative space? So a little bit about the long road and a little bit about your plan at University of Oregon.
Yeah, I appreciate that question, Jim, and also just appreciate your work and Taylor's work around helping me do this. I mean, you're making it sound like I was worried you guys were messing it up. I mean, you guys are taking care of. You guys take care of the all of the work. I feel like one of the reasons why I love Reclaim is that I know you're taking care of the things you're hosting, and that's that's just so important to me. And I will say, working on the back end of the blog now is so much faster. So kudos to you guys for that, getting all that. It's much, and then my blog is kind of heavy. I got images from 20 years.
Reclaim Cloud for life. We hear you.
That's it. I got to get a hashtag for that or something.
Exactly.
The notion of the long road, it's a play on my name, but it also goes back, as I say in my in the about section of the blog, it goes back to the notion that that Socrates really recognizes that a philosophical life, a life that is in pursuit of and search of justice, of truth, is not something that is undertaken in a moment, an aha moment of insight. It's a longer road, as he says in the Republic, that one has to take over the course of a life. It's about living out a commitment to integrity and to pursuing these questions of what's true, what's just, what's beautiful in everyday efforts. And that has really become, that was originally at the heart of the beginning of the blog. I think about, in fact, I was writing about this in one of the recent posts about essaying, which is really about trying, attempting. And the essay as a form is a trial, an effort. It's not always a polished something, but I try to polish them up a little bit if I can. But it's an effort to make meaning, an effort to make sense. And ultimately, the reason why the blog is so important to me is that it's now almost 20 years of me trying to make sense of what a finite human life is all about. And yes, it's a finite human life that has, a family and has two now growing and awesome children. And early blog posts were about them. You'll see stuff about them and all kinds of stuff. And then also my growth as a person and as an academic leader, and trying to navigate, very, very difficult times at Penn State, the Sandusky scandal, trying to navigate that at Michigan State, the Larry Nassar scandal, trying to find pathway and words and ways to be present and ways to be different in the wake of those traumas. And then now, it's just more of, I'm a provost, so thinking about what does that mean? I had to turn, really hurt me, but I had to turn the comments off on the blog, because when I talked to, my colleagues here in the, Kevin Reed in the general counsel office basically said, if you open up the comments and you open up a public forum, then as a basically, I'm an agent of the state now of Oregon. I couldn't remove comments if I wanted to. And I said, this is my blog. I'm not gonna like turn my ability off. I'm just gonna turn the comments off so that I don't have to, to worry about that. But it hurts me to do that, because I want that dialogue if I can have it. And, we try to use LinkedIn and other things to get some of that. But it's not just a tool. It's it's an endeavor to express meaning and purpose, and that's why it's so important to me. I think if I'll keep writing. And at the end of my life, or when I'm gone, that this blog will have expressed something of what I've tried to do to make sense of life, and to try to put my weight on the side of trying to make the world a little bit better, or at least move toward and understand what it might mean to have just relationships, and to find a pathway to more meaningful connection with people. And I think higher education is that's at the heart of what higher education is all about. And if I can blog in ways that help others make meaning, then that's great. But this is there is it really is a lifelong effort to make meaning.
Now, you are in a situation where what you say, and it's a good point you made about the comments. So like what you say on your blog, like I can pretty much, no one knows. I'm not an agent of the state. I don't really know if I have a state. I'm like a stateless body floating out somewhere in Italy. Whereas you're in a very different, context, right? You're, a major leader of a big university that's state run. And so what you say on that blog has a very different potential impact and import for your community. And so what does that mean, and what does that do to the nature of your communications, given, and you've talked about it several times, even in this conversation, given the kind of, strange moment within which we're in higher ed politically, and there seems to be a war being waged, against higher ed by the federal government, which is a unique situation we really haven't been in, at least that I remember in my time in higher ed. Does that change entirely where you feel comfortable blogging? Like, should there be a different space apart from the long road? Like, have you ever thought about maybe I need to take up a different space for a different, or does it have to be part of that integrated domain of your life?
Yeah. I mean, I have in the past spun up other things and tried to think, okay, let me, focus on maybe one aspect or another, but it always comes back. I always bring it back, posts that come back. We spun up a different, I think I had cplong.net and was trying to do some things over there, and we brought it back in. And what I am grateful for with the blog is that in this moment is that, there are certain rhetorical options you have as a provost. You can make and work with the president to make big university statements that sort of give, some voice to what the university stands for and things like that. And those statements, there's been a lot of calls for statements, particularly in the last few months. And I definitely understand the desire for that. What I have tried to do is be very clear in my speaking environment. So obviously, I'm every day I'm in different contexts, speaking to different groups, trying to be really clear about the importance and value of diversity, not as an ideology, but as a critical component of what it means to be excellent in doing research and teaching. You can't be excellent without a diverse lived experience in the lab, in the studio, in the classroom. That's not negotiable. So, the fact that it's been politicized is, that makes it more difficult, but it's not a negotiable issue from my perspective. Now, how do you live that out in practice? That's very important. And I've been really trying to focus on that. How do you continue to live that out in practice, despite the fact that it's been weaponized as a political thing? And the same thing with the research mission. We have to the federal government we've had this partnership for generations, and it's been transformational and vital. If federal research funding is going to be about ideological conformity, then we need to think a little bit more creatively about how we measure research excellence. So that's actually an opportunity to think about. But to get to the point of how you communicate, I began to return more to the blog recently because I've seen the limitations of the voice of the provost of the University of Oregon. I don't want to be that kind of provost. I'm trying to be a provost who is able to listen, who is willing to recognize when I make a mistake or when things don't work in the ways that we want them. I want to be the kind of provost that shows, and we're moving through some kind of challenging budgetary times. And so trying to communicate in ways that bring people into the process and the thinking about what we're going to have to do here is a really important challenge. And it's also an opportunity, I think, to try to build trust around it. But in an environment where there's often been an expectation that there's going to be decisions are just going to be made and rolled out, as opposed to here are the things we're facing and here are the challenges that we need to address, which is very much like what blogging is. It's like you're letting people in on the process of your thinking. And that can be very powerful in an environment where people are anxious. It can also add to anxiety. And so I'm very sensitive to that point. But my experience has been when I can own my own anxiety and I own my own effort to work through this with some integrity, other people see that as something that is that they recognize, then it's okay for them maybe to have the anxiety and the concern. It's because I think that's a normal human response when you're getting hammered on a financial resources question because of all the things that are happening. It's understandable that we would have anxiety and uncertainty, and so we have to be in that together rather than looking to somebody who can solve it all, or like we're going to have to solve this all together, or working together on it. And as we do that, my hope, and this is why, again, going back to blogging and the hopes and dreams and the values that animated the early work, that is the future. That has to be the future. It has to be a future of more connectedness, more openness, more willing to have some generosity and some curiosity and some grace and some care. Because what you're seeing is what happens when fear and when a certain kind of managerial approach goes rampant and then and fear is destructive. It's totally destructive.
And what you're saying, if I hear it right, is a radical transparency and openness. Like, who knew that we could have that kind of communication, in a relationship like that? But even think about the trickle down effect of that. If your provost is willing to do it and to engage you in these conversations and not just say this is the law or everybody get under their desks because who knows what's coming next. What does that mean for those folks in administration, those faculty who can then have those conversations with the people they work with openly, right? Like, I think you talked about modeling several times in this conversation. And I think it's a powerful sense as a leader to come in and, whether you're using a blog or wherever you're doing it, modeling a conversation around, these are our challenges. We need to figure out how we move forward together as a community. And you've talked with me both here, you said it a few times, but independently in other contexts, you've talked a lot about the value of community and trust. Yeah. And how do you, as a provost, and I know we're going to be short a little bit on time, so maybe let's think about this. How do you, as a provost, but just as a blogger, as a professor, as a person, see the relationship between your writing, whether online or not, and building that sense of community and trust, that you're hoping, will be the future? And I love to hear you say that, because I'm going to feel like I'm out here on,
no, it has
Jim
to be.
Island.
It has to be. No, you're not out there. Yes. The power of trust and of community is earned in every interaction. It has to be real. It can't be, oh, I'm turning on my effort now to connect and now I'm turning it off. Or, I mean, you can be tired, and believe me, as my wife reminds me, if you're tired, rest, and then get back into it. But you can be tired and you cannot live up to what you hope to live up to in a conversation. But you've got, bringing yourself to every engagement. I mean, talk about this with the staff all the time. It's like that's why I write journal in the morning. Part of it is to remind myself, okay, the next meeting, that's an opportunity to build trust or to erode it. And when you don't live up to what you say you care about, and then, that is also an opportunity to build trust by owning that and recognizing that. And I have seen, Jim, in my life, and particularly in my academic leadership life, at moments like at Penn State with the Sandusky scandal, like at Michigan State with the Nasher scandal, when leaders can open themselves up to some vulnerability and show that they don't have all the answers, but they're working as hard as they can to get to the better place, there's a resonance, there's a pulling together. And one of the things that I do, I started doing at Michigan State, and I'm doing it a lot here, is beginning meetings with a deep breath together. Just asking people to come into the space, leave the emails and other things out for a minute. Let all the ways the institution is trying to accelerate and instrumentalize our relationships. Let's just take a deep breath. And in the exhale, there's a silence that comes into the space that draws us together. And I've been really trying to pay attention to that silence and think about then how are the next words we're going to speak together, and how are the words we're going to bring into the space pulling us together, even when the things we have to say are hard and the decisions we have to make are hard. I mean, talking about being open and all of that also means being open about the fact that, the president's going to have to make hard decisions, and academic leadership is going to have to make hard decisions that affect people, and we have to do that with as much input and integrity as we can, but we also are going to have to be honest with ourselves about that. And my hope is that as we do that, with integrity and with a sense of working through it together, that we can actually build connection, even through difficult times, especially through difficult times. We need it the most at that point. And I mean, I've seen that happen in my own life, and we're going to need more of it now. And we're going to need it because not only to navigate the current moment, but you talked about seeds at the beginning, to plant the seeds for the future we want to have. The future has to be different. This is not sustainable. This is absolutely not sustainable. And it will not sustain itself. So what are we building together that is more sustainable? That's the work.
If I'm hearing what you're saying, it's viva la blog.
Viva la blog, for sure. For sure. Yes, for
Chris,
sure.
Look, I just want to thank you for coming on Reclaim TV, for sharing your insights, for bringing, apart from everything else, encouragement and hope that, like, not only is it not sustainable, but there's people who are saying we can do better, different. Yeah. So thank you for that. That's always awesome to hear. And soup for the soul for this
Yeah.
guy, because I need it. So
Yeah, I need it
I
too.
want to
Thank you.
thank you again for being on Reclaim TV. Thank you, everybody listening, and we'll see you on another episode. Bye-bye.
Bye.